about to dive into writing your first novel? Well, wait, just wait a few minutes and watch this video first. If you love these kinds of videos and want to hear more from me about writing, publishing, marketing, all things bookish, please hit the subscribe button. Now, before we get started, I'd just like to say that way back when I started in 2012, the publishing industry was actually quite different to how it is now. And as a self-published author, there really wasn't a roadmap, and now there is. So it is actually a lot easier to get started now in many ways than what it was back then. That having said, there are 5 things that I think would have helped me hugely if I had known about them back in the day. Let's dive in. Okay, the first thing I think you should be doing before you put pen to paper or you start tapping away on the keyboard is to establish your genre. Now, that sounds simple, but there's actually a lot that goes into this. And one of the things is that it's important to choose a genre that you love. Now, when I'm talking about genre, I'm talking about popular fiction. So I'm not talking about literary fiction, I'm talking about popular fiction like thrillers, sci-fi, romance, fantasy. Now, the reason why I say that it's really important to be passionate about the genre you choose is that, spoiler alert, writing a book is hard. And if you've ever written a full-length novel before, you know that it's a slog. It can be a slog, even if you are loving it. So by choosing a genre that you're really passionate about, you are making it so much easier for yourself. Because on those days when it's hard, when you're tired, when your creativity is waning, when you wish that you were somewhere else, the story and the love of story and the love of the genre you're writing in will carry you through. Now, if the genre you've chosen is hugely popular, like sexy contemporary romance or romantasy, which is very big at the moment, then life is a lot easier. You will be writing for a much bigger market. However, there will also be a lot more competition. However, if your genre is a little bit nichey, for example, let's say historical fiction set in ancient Rome. Now, there is definitely a genre there, there's definitely a niche genre there, and the amount of people who write in it are quite small, but there is a voracious readership as well. So it's a smaller genre, but it's one where you could really establish yourself. Number 2, and this will seem a little bit contradictory to what I've just been saying, but choose a genre that exists. Trying to forge a path with a non-existent genre is actually very difficult, and I speak from personal experience here. Back in the day, I started writing historical romance, which is a thing, but unfortunately it was set in Anglo-Saxon England, 7th century Anglo-Saxon England, which is not a thing. It is a thing if you're writing historical fiction, but not if you're writing historical romance. So I was making life quite hard for myself initially. Make sure you are writing a book that's in an established genre. And what I mean by this too is, don't say, oh, my book has some suspense elements, my book has some mystery elements, my book has some romance in it, oh, my book's, historical too, but it's got a little bit of paranormal in it, and somehow readers are going to find it, because they won't. You need to choose a lane, you need to choose a genre. It needs to be historical fiction, or it needs to be thriller, or it needs to be romance. And there is romantic suspense if you want a genre, and that is an actual genre. So go for it if that's what you want, but make sure it exists before you start writing the book. It is so much more difficult to shoehorn your book into the market than it is to understand before you start writing, so that you can write the kind of book that can fit neatly into a category on a shelf. Number 3 is write as many words as you can before you actually try to either find an agent and get traditionally published, or put your book up on one of the self-publishing platforms like KDP or Apple Books. It's important to do your apprenticeship first. They say that you can't really call yourself a master of the craft until you have written 1 million words. And I'm not sure if that's true or not, but it does kind of make sense. The fact of the matter is, the more you write, the more you improve. And I know we don't want to hear that. We want to hear that we write our debut novel. We've never written anything before then. We submit it to an agent. They love it. They find a publisher, and we're out there in the world selling our first book, and we haven't written anything before. But despite the fact that that's what we hear on the media, those people are outliers, and most people are not like that. Most people are more like me, for example, that wrote many books before I started to actually make money from my books. And I have to say that my first 4 books were written under another name. They were written in epic fantasy, which is a genre I love, by the way. And they were my practice books, and I actually took them down. They are no longer for sale. And the reason for that is not that they're rubbish, although they're not at the standard that I would like them to be now, but they were my practice books, and I learned my craft with them. I made all my mistakes with them before I was well known in another pen name. It was all part of learning my craft, and it's made me a better writer. So don't rush in. Don't slam out your first book and think that that's it, that you've mastered the art, because with the rare exception of a few unicorns, most of us are not like that, and that's perfectly fine. Think of it as an apprenticeship, that you're learning an art, just like a painter would or a concert pianist would. Writing is an art, and even if you are writing genre fiction, which is for the masses and it's popular fiction, there's still an art to that. There's a real art to that. So don't rush the process. Make a point of trying to get as many words out there before you actually perhaps even write a full-length novel. Maybe write a few short stories or a novella or 2. Find your voice, find a genre that fits you and suits you, and don't be afraid to experiment before you kind of get serious. Number 4 is read widely in your chosen genre. So you have narrowed down the genre you're going to write in. Let's say you're going to write romantasy. So you have decided that is the type of book you love to read and you want to write it too. So what you need to do is go on to Amazon, for example. It's the best way, really, or go to your local library and check out the best-selling romantasy books and read, I would say, at least 3 or 4 of them. The really top ones, the ones you can choose both self-published and traditionally published books. I think it's a good idea to get a mix of both, maybe 2 of each. Read them and then go to Amazon again and look at the reviews. Now, reading it first is always handy because you get to decide whether you like them or you don't like them, and then you look at the reviews and you select the top ones and you also select the bottom ones too. So you make a list of all the things that readers loved and a list of all the criticisms that readers had, and you use this as a framework. Now, this can be really handy before you embark on your book because you can incorporate some of these elements and you know what to avoid. You know there are certain tropes, for example, that readers hate, or there are tropes that readers love. There are aspects about world building, about plot, about magic systems, for example, if we're using romantasy as an example, about the types of romance they love, the tropes, the romantic tropes that they love. So all of these things can be really useful before we start writing our first book. Don't skip this step. This is probably one of the most important of the lot, and it's not something I did back in the day, and I wish I had. Because it's important to realise that although we primarily write for ourselves, and I always have, I've always written to entertain myself, to provide escapism and adventure, and to live a different life that I couldn't live otherwise. At the same time, I know that I'm also writing to please my readers, and I have in mind when I write the type of reader that's going to really enjoy my books. And by doing this step, by actually going on to Amazon, for example, and looking at the reviews and seeing what real readers love and hate about the genre you're going to be writing in, it builds a strong foundation and gives you, it's amazing research, and it gives you a really strong framework to start with before you dive into your first book. And the 5th thing, which is really important to do before you embark on your first novel, is to think about what your goals are. Now, this is important because sometimes we just do something and we don't really think about what we want out of it in the future, and sometimes we want different things to what we think we do. It's a strange thing, but for example, if you just want to write as a hobby, but you tell yourself that you actually want to do it seriously at the same time, and you perhaps want to make a career out of it, you can get yourself all tied in knots, and then you start to feel resentful because actually the reason why you started it was just for a bit of fun. It's something that you could eventually finish, for example, a full-length novel, and your friends and family could read it, and that is absolutely fine and absolutely valid in itself. So with goals, I tend to think of it in 3 levels really. So is it just going to be a hobby for you? And I say just, I mean, it's not just, it's a wonderful thing, but is it going to be a hobby for you? Or is it going to be like a part-time gig for you? Or is it something that you would love to do, like I do, for example, and it's always been my dream to do it full-time? Now, this is important because the way you approach your writing will change. For example, if it's a hobby for you, you will just do it when it suits you. You will do it when the mood strikes you, whenever you are feeling creative. Maybe you've got a certain time of day you like to sit down, maybe in the afternoon with a cup of coffee, and you let your imagination fly. And that's great, and that's absolutely how it should be. However, for example, if you're wanting to make a part-time income, maybe to supplement a day job, but you do want a little bit of income from it, and you also would like to be reasonably productive, you'd like to maybe put out a book or 2 a year, then actually having a schedule of some kind is an important thing. And if you want to take it one step further and make it full-time, then absolutely a schedule is important, and you need to approach it like a job. So that means that even if you've got a full-time job, which I did in the beginning, you need to schedule in time to write in the margins of your day. And obviously, if you've got a busy life and you don't just have a part-time or a full-time job, but you've also got a family, that can be tricky. But it is a case of priorities as well. Like, can you go without watching TV for a while, for example, or surf the internet a little bit less? There are always things that we know we waste time on that we could use that time for writing if we wanted. And then you just break down how many words you need to write, or how many chapters you need to write in order to get a full-length novel. So for example, if I'm writing a novel that's 60,000 words, and I know that I write around 1,000 words an hour, which I do. That's just me personally. You might write faster, you might write slower. We're all different. So I know that if I write for 3 hours every morning, and I usually write from 8:30 to 12:30, then I know that I'm going to write 3,000 words, and at the end of the week I'm going to have about 15,000 words, which means at the end of the month I'm going to have 60,000, which is a full draft. And that's not including weekends, that's just Monday to Friday. So you can see that's 3 hours a day. That's pretty amazing, and I had the rest of the day to do other things. And if you were part-time, then you could do, for example, half that, so 1,500 a day, so that's like an hour and a half, which is not that long at all, and you could spend 2 months doing it. So having a schedule of some kind can really, really help, and finding the time of day that you're actually most productive is also important. For years I thought I was most productive in the afternoons, and that was because my day job meant that I had to work in the mornings. But then when I went full-time, I discovered that actually I'm far more creative in the morning, and so that's when I get my words in. And I treat it like a job, because it is a job. It is, but you have to, the thing with writing is that you, especially if you want to make it your career, is that you have to treat it as a job before it's your job, which means that you have to find time for it, and you have to treat that time with reverence, and tell everybody that you are not to be disturbed, even though it can be it can be tricky in the beginning. So those are my 5 pieces of advice about what to do before you write your first novel, and I hope you found them useful. And these pieces of advice are also useful even if you have been writing for a while, and perhaps you're feeling like your writing needs a reboot. You need to perhaps start from scratch. Things haven't been going well for you. Perhaps you haven't been selling many books, and you're thinking, you know what, I need to start from scratch. I need to perhaps rethink my genre. And this advice, I think, can be really useful for you too. So if you found this video useful, please like or comment down below, or ask a question if you want anything clarified. I'd be happy to do a video clarifying or going into more detail about any of the things I've talked about in this video. Until next time, happy writing.